This is the Elite Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we teach you the proven methods to grow your seven-figure business to 10 million and beyond. Please welcome your host, Brett Gilliland.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Elite Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm here with a very special guest, which is often the case. I feel very spoiled. I always have amazing guests on this podcast. Usually we've got seven-figure business owners who are sharing their in-the-trenches experience, their real insights from real founders kind of a thing. And I love those episodes. But today, I'm especially excited because I have someone with me who not only is a really close friend of mine, but who has spent hours and hours and days in the trenches with those seven-figure business owners, teaching and coaching them. His name is Dan Ralphs. Welcome to the show, Dan. I'm going to share a little bit more about you before you chime in. Sorry about that. Dan has spent years working with small business owners. I know because most of that time he spent with me, or I've watched him do it. He's moving them from chaos and confusion to clarity and confidence. As part of a leadership development team that both of us were together on, the company we were serving was on the Inc. 500 list and great places to work at the same time. Dan builds those types of companies. He helps business owners build those types of companies, the kinds of companies that are not only wildly profitable, but also are great places to work. Dan is currently the founder and CEO of Dream Leadership Consulting. It's based in the desert here in Gilbert, Arizona, where I'm based as well. As the founder of that company, Dan is a seven-figure business growth guru who's helped hundreds of companies on their journey from 7 to 8 figures. His expertise lies in the area of strategy, leadership, and culture. I mentioned how together we worked on a team where we were helping to build a company that was on those Inc. 500 and great places to work lists at the same time. And Dan really does emphasize building companies that are both wildly profitable and amazing places to work for those team members that are part of creating those companies. So I've blabbed on enough. Dan, let me officially welcome you to the show. Let's hear from you for a minute.
Yeah, thank you. For some reason, I have this story popping in my head. I know I've probably shared it with you before, but I once had the chance to introduce Stephen Covey, the Stephen Covey, the leadership guru of gurus. And I was at this conference. I was the one who prepared they sent this like 5-page bio in advance, and you took that bio and you crafted into this really beautiful 5-minute. I was ready to get hired by Stephen Covey on the spot to be his official herald, And I walk up to him before the meeting and I go, Dr. Covey, it's so nice to meet you. I'm going to be doing your introduction today. And he goes, oh, I hate those things. He's like, just tell him that I love my family. And I feel the same way. Like whenever I have someone give me some flowery introduction before I say anything, I always feel so like, I hate those things. Like, can't we just like base the quality of our ideas, the quality of the conversation based on the quality of the ideas, not necessarily who's saying them, right? Anyway, I'm excited to be here. Moral of the story. Thank you for the introduction. And I can't wait to talk about small business growth today with you.
Well, for the rest of the Ralphs family who are listening to this, now you know that your dad, your husband,
yeah, as they all like at least one, like those are probably the people that actually need my bio is my teenagers, that they're just like, and your dad is amazing, and they're like, I need to be convinced. Tell me more.
Yeah, tell me more.
Yeah,
that's right. All right. Well, Dan and I have known each other for a long time, so this hopefully should feel pretty fluid as we're talking. And Dan and I have swimmed in similar circles, and we know many of the same people. I
do kind of feel, wait, Brett, I feel like I should give you an introduction. Who gives you an introduction?
That. Yeah, we're not doing that. This is my show, so we're not doing the introduction. Anyway, so Dan and I have worked together a long time, many years, and have served the same customers many times as well, including right now. We have members of our elite community who Dan helps personally, with their planning, actually. And I want to start there. We might go other directions, but I was just really pleased to hear recently that this customer, this member of ours, of our top tier, our elite circle members, this is our highest group, spends some time every quarter and every month actually talking with Dan as a coach. And we have this product where some of our members can get like additional hands-on help. And so this member gets help from Dan, and this member has been doing quarterly and annual planning with his leadership team. Like as an intact team, they've been doing this for years now. They've been long members of our community, have been doing great annual and quarterly planning for years. And so it surprised me to hear recently this member say to me, when Dan started helping us with planning, it was a little bit challenging at first because I was used to it a certain way. I was used to running things, and I don't know, maybe he hadn't done much pre-work in advance to make that go, and he just kind of showed up and did it. So it was a little hard that first meeting, but the second meeting he told me that you guys had was the best planning meeting they've ever had. And so what I would love to dig in with you today, Dan, is what you think made the difference for him. Here's a guy who's done annual and quarterly planning for years. And I don't know how many of our listeners can say, yeah, I'm a master at planning, but this guy could say, I'm at least an expert at planning.
He would have been in the top 5% of small businesses easily in his consistency and quality planning.
Yeah, that's a great way to characterize it.
Right.
Top 5% easily in consistency and quality of planning. That's what he was. And yet somehow with your help, there was an additional level of value that caused him to go, wow, that was the best planning we've ever done. I just talked to him recently. Actually, he told me that they wrapped up the quarter in amazing fashion on both the operational side of things and the priority work, the planning, move the business forward kind of work that you helped them with. And so I'd just like to tease that apart a little bit and see if you have any insights as the facilitator, as the coach, and what unlocked a new level of greatness in planning for this business owner and his team.
Yeah, first of all, I'm such a huge fan of the quarterly and annual planning rhythm, which you taught me, which is this rhythm of saying every quarter we push pause on our business, and we identify we zoom way out. We say, what's the most important work we can do in our business right now? And I just tell people that there's nothing like super magical about it. It just kind of makes sense, but it's so often not done well, or it's not done at all. And it's so hard to lose as a business owner if every quarter you pause, and in it is difficult and is like, I'm playing chess, hard thinking way of doing it, like as hard as you can. You think about what could be possibly out of all of the millions of things we could do for this business, what are the 3 most important things we could do for this business? And then you go do those 3 things every quarter to make the business better. It's kind of impossible not to get better. Like you have to be really dumb or really bad. Like it seems impossible to me that you would somehow miss and not make progress in your business if you go do that. So for those listening, if you don't yet have that rhythm of prioritization in your business, go put it in place today. Go schedule it, go figure it out. And part of the reason I say that is that the other thing that I've noticed that happened, maybe you've seen this phenomenon too, that it takes about 90 days for my best laid plans to be lied to waste. It takes about that long for the business to feel chaotic and crazy again, and for it to come apart. And then I get organized and I tidy up my office again. Like it's like my garage. My garage takes about 90 days to go from totally clean to totally messy. And then I clean it again. And then 90 days later, it's a complete mess again. And that's sort of the same way in a business. It's like the nature of business tends to unravel and unwind. And so it's not answering your original question. It's just me promoting and saying, hey, like we love this process. And as a result, and I sit in probably more of these than anyone I know. So I'm probably in at least 4 or 5 quarterly planning meetings facilitating per quarter.
Yeah. Per quarter. So
per quarter. Yeah.
And they're 2-day sessions.
2 days. It's a lot. It's a lot, but I love it because I love that moment of creation where we dig in and we dive in. So let me see if I can
But before
unpack.
you answer, you answer the question, because I love that you set this up the way that you have, Dan. And I love the way that you everything you say. I love you as a teacher, period. But you talk about hitting pause. Just hit pause. That right there is one of the biggest game changers for business owners who figure it out. Right? That's the difference maker between those who do and those who don't. It's the ones who stop the chaos long enough to reassess, to think, to step back. And the vast majority don't and won't. And that just is what it is. But for those who really want to grow something meaningfully, grow something intentionally, it is absolutely required. And I love the way that you set that up.
Yeah. And it'd be a little bit like a basketball team without a coach. It's like the difference between street ball and like formal basketball. And the street ball may have a lot of talent and put in a lot of effort, but a well-organized strategic game plan will beat the street ballers every time. And that's sort of how I feel about it. It's like putting that structure in place that allows you to really go win. And so let me see if I can identify, having done this a lot of times, for those of you who are listening, trying to do it, what are some things that make it stand out from the traditional kind of framework? I think the reason someone like Morty, who's done it 100 times, why he's getting additional benefit is first this. I recognize that the quarterly planning process, if I'm the small business owner, I'm entering into it. Traditionally, the way that planning has happened is I sit down and I go, what are my ideas? And then we go implement my ideas. And that's historically what you've done. If you've been in business for 17 years, you've probably done it at least that way 15 of those 17 years. And what we have to transition to, especially if we're a little bit bigger and we're starting to have a forming leadership team where you have a director of marketing and maybe a director of operations, and you have this like burgeoning leadership team, the transition that has to happen is we have to transition from single leader making decisions to team of leaders making decisions. And that transition from individual making decisions to group of people making decisions is a really important transition. And I think
some groups, doesn't that just slow it down, Dan? Come on, doesn't that just slow it down? That's a concern people have, right? So I'm trying to represent.
It slows it down. What's the old saying? Go slow to go fast. It's like during the meeting, it goes slow. In fact, I think the max I've had in a quarterly planning meeting is 12 or 13 people. And the more people, the slower it goes.
Yeah.
And we're just okay with that because we understand if we can have owner level buy-in from whoever's sitting in that room. And by the way, it's not just executives, it's not just directors. Sometimes we'll invite the whole team to that meeting because we want everyone's full buy-in on the plan of how we're going to grow the company. Sometimes at some point you can't invite the whole team because it's too big, but we might invite the 10-person team. We might invite the whole team to sit in on that meeting. And as you gain that buy-in, all of a sudden everything gets easier because everyone's growing in the same direction, making similar decisions. And so the first thing we recognize is we're trying to transition from a single owner making decisions to a group of owners making decisions. And that's a hard thing to relinquish if you haven't had that moment yet for you as a business owner to say, this is an our thing, not a my thing. But once you do make it an our thing, now all the problems get shared as well. All of the goals and all of the driving effort gets shared as well. There come moments where the team is calling you, pulling you forward instead of you always feeling like you're pulling the team forward. And so that's the primary kind of transition that we make. And that happened with this in this example as well. And it's not that they weren't making group decisions, but what we demanded is that the players on the team were playing as hard and in a way that equaled our coach. And when that happens, everything kind of transitions, everything changes.
So I want to underscore, I often do on this podcast, I'll underscore key lessons that I heard. So the key lesson there is that a co-created outcome is infinitely more valuable, more effective, more impact than the lone leader making the decision and trying to get everybody else to help plan
Yeah.
what that decision, how to go get that decision.
And so the question becomes, how do you do that? There's a little bit of an identity moment. And what I mean by that is that in most of the small business I work with, the people who are sitting in their seats, it's the first time they've really led in a big way. It's the first time they've been a director of anything, or a chief marketing officer of this, or a sales director, or whatever seat they're in. It's the first time, not always, but often the first time they've ever really been in a seat like that before. And this is the same group that I was talking about that had this big step forward. They did something that I thought was really cool. The CEO said, hey, listen, because we're trying to live into our future, and this is like a blue collar service business, right? There's tough old blue collar guys with beards and beer bellies. I shouldn't say that a lot, but yes, a little bit, right? And so at the end of the day, they said, we're going to wear suit coats to our meeting, all of us. So be prepared, suit coat or a dress. Like, we're expecting you to show up in business attire, not business casual, business attire.
For the planning meeting.
For the planning meeting.
Okay.
They never wear it any other day of the year, never. But that day, they're all showing up in jackets. And they walk into the meeting, and it was a nice meeting room, and they looked like the leadership team of a $40 million company instead of the leadership team of an $8 million company, $9 million. And I told him later, I said, I think that was really important, because those leaders all of a sudden looked at themselves differently. They saw themselves not as a technician, but as a director of an important position in a company. And so as the facilitator, I'm often saying things like, usually people don't get invited to, people like you don't get invited to meetings like this. Like, meaning, like, we're calling you up to be a different type of person. We're inviting you to be a strategic thinking, numbers crunching, analysis guru for your company. And we need you to live into that kind of person. And we're going to treat you that way, and we're going to see you that way, and we're going to invite you into that level of leadership. And we have to, as leaders, we have to do our best to help people identify with that possibility of that's who they want to be and who they are. And as that happens, they show up differently, not only in that meeting, but for the rest of the year, because they see themselves as something different.
So there's an identity shift where you're taking otherwise, like, good people, smart, willing to show up and do good work, but very, very focused on their own role, the perspective of their role or their function. And you're bringing them into a space that's more company-wide view, understanding, strategy. The lens is different. The view is higher. It's more complete.
Yeah.
You're enrolling them in co-creating a future with that team that now they're a part of, that they can see in a different way.
Yeah. Let's take, like, I grew up, my dad was a butcher and my mom was a school teacher. And so the first time I heard, oh, he's $1 million CEO, that was like otherworldly cool to me, right? I was like, holy cow, like, it must be so fancy. And as my buddy once said, he's like being a CEO is a little bit like riding a tiger. And as you go through town, everyone looks at you and goes, wow, he's riding a tiger. And yet, if you're on the top of a tiger, you're like, oh no, I'm riding a tiger, right? But I thought that way about CEOs. I thought, man, they're riding this tiger. But at the end of the day, and so it took me a long time to feel like I belonged there. And as long as I was feeling self-conscious about whether or not I belonged there, I didn't give my full self. I was always hesitant, nervous, and anxious, and as in any endeavor in life, when we're hesitant and nervous and anxious and we're holding back, we don't give our best self. And so as we transition them to go, you belong here. We're going to treat you like you belong here. We're going to play full out. This isn't going to be my decision as a CEO that I just hand to you. This is going to be our decision. and we don't know what that outcome will be. And if you don't put in full effort, we won't get a great outcome. Like all of a sudden, as I begin to identify, I belong here. This is my meeting. This is my company. All of a sudden that just sinks in this identity of, one, I own it, and two, I belong at the leadership table. And I better operate that way and act that way.
So we started out saying, if they'll just do this one thing, if they'll just pause every quarter and do a little bit of intentional thinking and planning, they will see progress.
Yeah,
that's true. And if you want like this accelerant effect, like this multiplying effect, you enroll people into a new sense of identity and belonging on this guiding team. Like this is the team that's going to come together and make decisions and move us in the direction together. That takes that to a whole new level.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, great
Okay.
summary.
So what else did you find? That they've been doing planning a lot. You helped them with some of this identity work. Was there anything else that were maybe adjustments or tweaks or maybe brand new things altogether that helped that planning be?
I think the second kind of principle that I would suggest is just a disciplined demand for excellent thinking. A disciplined demand for excellent thinking. Like one of the things that and it's sometimes really helpful, by the way, just to have someone outside of your group come be that demander of excellent thinking, someone from outside your group to come and ask questions you guys haven't traditionally thought of, which is my role as a facilitator, to kind of come in and go, well, what about this? And what about that? And how about this? And just kind of ask a ton of questions. But one of the things I demand of the groups that I work with is excellent thinking. So they need to be able to justify and give rationale and reasoning behind the way that they're approaching it and the why that they're approaching it. And I sometimes will linger on a question longer than most groups feel comfortable, because I don't feel like we've had excellent thinking around it yet. And so we have to be willing, like I think about it a little bit like a chess game. And I'll periodically, I'm not a very good chess player, but I'll periodically play my kids in chess to make myself feel smarter. Now they're old enough to beat me, and so it doesn't help me as much anymore. But I'll play chess. And usually the reason I would win is just I would take longer and be more methodical in my thinking. And because took longer and was more methodical in my thinking, now that I was smarter than my kids, but I would win because I would just be more disciplined in my thinking. And so in a similar way, when we're in a leadership meeting, like we have to be willing to be very disciplined and committed to kind of work through the thought process of our business in a way that takes a long time of disciplined, committed thought. And so that's probably the second kind of accelerant, the second recommendation is to discipline yourself and push your group to be disciplined in their thinking. And the practical application of that is we just ask lots more questions, and we ask it 5 different ways. And we ask it about our competitors, and we ask it about ourselves, and we compare our competitors with ourselves. We look across every department in the company, whether it's marketing or sales or fulfillment or finance. We look at horizontally, we look at up and down, we go deep into finance, we go deep into marketing, we go deep into sales. Like we just are willing to think about each detail of the company, and we're willing to endure the effort of putting in all that thought. And that's what makes a big difference, I think.
So, Dan, you and I have a lot in common. One of them is a common, we call it a man crush. Yes. One of our very favorite common man crushes, a guy by the name of Tyler Norton.
Oh, Tyler Norton, hubba hubba.
Hubba hubba. I could just hear Tyler talking about, the difference between business owners who do all the things that we're all wanting to do and those who don't. Comes down to thinking, critical thinking. He would use the term critical thinking. I think you've used that once or twice today. But just to critically think, that is a muscle many of us don't exercise. And it's related to pushing pause on the business. We're so into the things we already know that we don't stop long enough and just think. And so for you to come in as a facilitator and really push and test their critical thinking skills is super valuable.
And one of the things, the good news is we can get better and will get better at it with practice. So I worked with a company it's been 4 years. This year will be my 4th year doing their annual planning meetings. And when I first showed up, they were a group of 22, 23, 25-year-old kids with a 40-year-old CEO. They were a young company. So everyone there brand new. And the level of thinking to start was like me playing chess with my kids.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, how cute. It's like nice that they're like trying it out. They're learning the discipline of just moving the pieces around the board. And now, 4 years later, I mean, I would put them up against any company that I work with. And they're not old. I mean, they're still so young, right? All under 30. Their entire executive team, minus their CEO, is all under 30 years old. And yet they're good. They're tough. I mean, they are thinking in deep and critical ways about their business. And it just takes practice. And so if every time you go into a quarterly planning meeting, it doesn't feel like you're lifting a heavier weight than the one you lifted the last time, then we're not going to be making the progress we need to. And so that's what I told this group. I said, hey, listen, like PR, we got to PR this time. We got to even set a better record at the quality of our thinking this time than we did last time.
I love that. Okay. So when I think about improving my planning, it's one thing to be willing to engage in this critical thinking. It's another to have structure. And we're not going to spend any time today on structure. But you can't just you'll see improvement if you just go make some space and think. Like I believe honestly that just engaging in the thinking will help you come up with things that you wouldn't have otherwise. But there are processes, there is structure that can help you organize your thinking, right?
Yes,
And facilitate this exercising of those muscles. And so, whether you learn that from us at Elite Entrepreneurs, or you hire an external facilitator like Dan to come in and help you, I highly recommend people get some kind of structure. So there's a rhythm, right? A consistency and a rhythm. There's the critical thinking. There's the co-creative nature of involving the whole team as owners to make this happen. But then follow a structure. Make sure that that's part of how you get this good critical thinking as a team.
And if there's not a structure, what will happen is our critical thinking, I talk about like elevations in business where it's like the daily, weekly, monthly, annual, like what will happen the tendency is there's a gravitational pull towards the daily conversation. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have some disciplined structure around the way we're going to organize and have this conversation, the tendency will be that it devolves into what we do tomorrow. Because that's where we hang out. That's where we spend all our time, right? That's where all our focus is there. And so you have to have some disciplined structure around, hey, we're going to keep this conversation at an elevation of an annual level or a quarterly level kind of conversation. And because if not, and you've probably been in meetings like this where it's like, oh yeah, let's have this great annual planning meeting. And the next thing you know, you're planning your company party for this weekend. It's like, wait, no, we need to keep this kind of tier of conversation. And so one of my jobs as a facilitator is to make sure that we stay at that kind of level of the right level of conversation, and that we never allow ourselves to dip too far into the weeds, but we are constantly trying to stay above at the right elevation as we're having those conversations.
Hey, so give a quick tip or two to business owners who want to keep the level of conversation where it ought to be in those meetings, but have team members bringing stuff up or trying to stick to the wrong level. What would you have them do if they don't have a facilitator like you helping them out? How can they cut that off, or how can they redirect?
The simplest way is something that we create, something that we call a bin, big paper on the wall. We write bin at the top. And every time something comes up, it's like, oh, we need to remember to do this, or we forgot to turn off the thing, or like whatever it is that shows up in the middle of that meeting. Because when you're thinking, you'll oftentimes have at this level, you often see things, you'll go, oh, we should go do this. Oh, like that's a great thing we should try. And we just need a place to put it. And so we just put it on this wall, we call it the bin, and we write it down. There's a list of 20 things at the end. And then we have somebody take that, archive it, and it shows up in another meeting later on. But just a simple little place to put it. And that's also, as my facilitator, my way of going, I like that. Thank you. We're not going to lose that thought, but we're also not going to spend time on that thought as we move things forward.
Yeah, good. I love that practice. I don't know that I've heard it called a bin. That's a new one.
What do you call it? You
call
have
it a parking lot, like
parking lot, bin, yeah.
Whatever you call it, a place for those ideas to sit and not get lost, so that the person sharing the idea doesn't feel unheard or undervalued. Oh yeah, that is a good idea. Just the wrong time and place for it. So let's capture it here, so we can keep moving on this level of conversation.
And it's a subtle way, as you walk over and write at the bin, for you to kind of say, nope, that's not where we need to be right now.
Yeah. Okay, good. I think we have time, if you have one off the top of your head, one more key thing that you've seen has elevated this team's planning from, we were doing a solid job of planning, to now I feel like we're doing world-class kind of stuff.
I think the last bit of thinking around this, and honestly, I'm like thinking of this up on the fly. I'm like, what is it that makes a big difference? I think the last bit of thinking on this is probably the difference that was made is just having a facilitator. And I know that sounds a little self-serving, but I do think there's something really powerful in having someone else, some external perspective in the room that hasn't been living and breathing in the day-to-day. Like, it's like, there's like some odor commercial that said you become nose blind, where you like can't just tell what really smells in your business. And to find and identify someone outside of your company that can come help you notice where you're nose blind, it can be really, really helpful. And whether that's a board of advisors, or whether that's you inviting your spouse into the meeting and going, because I've seen that happen, where an owner will say, "What, you're part owner of this, honey? Why don't you come sit in this quarterly planning meeting and just tell us what we're not seeing?" And I've seen really good benefits from that kind of a relationship. So to find someone that can help you see the business in a whole new or brand new way is probably one of the things that they've gotten a lot of benefit from. And that's not necessarily saying I'm really fantastic. It's just I'm new and I'm different. And I haven't been smelling those same smells for the last 10 years.
Right.
And so I can look at something and be like, I know that may seem normal to you, but that's not normal and healthy. And as a result of that, you need to make some changes. And so I hope most companies who are listening have some person like that in their business. And it can be especially helpful in that leadership planning meeting when people we're making some big decisions, to say, oof, that the normal way of something happening, that's not what a normal way of, is not normal. That's not what it should look like.
Yeah.
And so to have that kind of person, the doctor sitting outside on your quarterly checkup, is probably really healthy, really good.
We have another shared friend. Her name is Stephanie. She uses the phrase "fresh eyes."
Fresh eyes.
Somebody can come in with fresh eyes, see something completely different, and just, challenges, not to challenge your assumptions or to push you, but to just bring in a different perspective.
And I would say yes to challenge your assumptions, and yes to push you.
Yeah,
right?
I should have said that differently. I would say it's valuable without challenging your assumptions and pushing you. It's valuable just to have the fresh perspective. And then if you have somebody who's capable at testing your assumptions and pushing on your thoughts, that's even better.
For sure.
So, all right, awesome. This has been packed full of goodness, Dan. I told you before we started recording that I could just talk with you for hours. So you have a world of knowledge around this. And as I was doing the math, you said 4 to 5 of these every quarter that you're facilitating. The best leaders I know do this once a quarter. That's it, right? They do it 4 times a year, 3 quarterly, 1 annual, 4 times a year. So the best leaders I know do this 4 times a year. You're involved in 4 or 5 of these a quarter, which means you're doing 15 to 20 of these a year. And we were talking before the show, 15 of those 2 days a piece, you're doing a full month of this every single year.
Yeah, some of you are like, you poor man, but it's weird. I love it. I love the process. I love the dialogue. I love creating and creating something that will have big impact for the companies that I get to serve. So for me, I love it.
Well, whether or not somebody ever reaches out to you to say, hey, Dan, what would it take to help, have you come help us do this? I would love for them to at least be able to follow you somewhere on LinkedIn or somewhere else on social, or go to a website. How would people connect with you?
Yeah, you can just find me on, honestly, if you want to reach out to me, just find me on LinkedIn, Dan Ralphs, and shoot me a message. I monitor that pretty carefully and would love to just connect with you and help you however I can. I'm compulsively helpful. And so
you are compulsively
as
helpful.
much
I
as,
love that about you.
as much as I can help, the happier I am. So if there's something I can do to serve, let me know.
All right. Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure to have you today as a more formal guest on our podcast, but you've been a longtime friend of Elite Entrepreneurs, and I hope that continues for many, many years to come. Thanks for sharing your insight. For anybody who's listened today, there's very practical takeaways for how to level up in your planning, in your intentionality, and your business will benefit if you'll just hit that pause button, as Dan said. Do some of that critical thinking, exercise those critical thinking muscles, make sure the team gets involved, co-create with them. I just highlighted a few of the things that he shared, and you will see marked improvements. So thanks for listening. Listen again next week. Share, like, do all those things so that as many seven-figure business owners as possible get the benefit of these episodes that we're putting out. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Brett.
You've been listening to the Elite Entrepreneurs Podcast with your host, Brett Gilliland. Be sure to leave a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. You may also want to visit our website, eliteentrepreneurspodcast.com, to find additional resources to grow your business from 7 figures to 10 million and beyond.